is a presentation when you will need at some point your phone just to look at the QR code that can appear from time to time. In fact, just one is very important, so I will tell you. So I have no specific competing interests regarding this talk. I received grants from Fondation Pierre Daniker, so that was a long time ago, Rennes University Hospital, my hospital, and also from the French Agency for Research, French Ministry of Health, French Ministry of Higher Education, and now from the Institut Universitaire de France. And I will talk today about zombie trials. So first of all, I use the term zombie trial from these papers that were published in 2020 in Anesthesia. The first one was published by Professor Karl Slice, who is the editor-in-chief of the journal. And in fact, he wrote about those trials that he received that relied on what he called false data. And as you can see, he is the editor-in-chief and he received a lot of randomized control trials. Among those trials, so he received 526 trials. Among those, he estimated that 73 had false data. That was the red line here. And the red line with the dot points, in fact, it was a 43 trial that he truly categorized as zombies. So what is a zombie? It's a trial that is false beyond repair. So it's obviously very false. He cannot say that it's fraudulent, because to say that it's fraudulent, you need to know the intention of the person who submits the trial, but he can say that the trial is false beyond repair, and this is the definition that I will use today. And obviously, he is a good editor. He knows the semiology of these trials, and the trials do not appear in his journal. At least he tried to avoid publishing them. Sometimes, from time to time, those trials can be published in the literature, and correction of those trials that are published are often too little and also too late. This is the spirit of this trial. And in fact, my talk will try to give some examples about this. So first, I need to thank all the team that tried to fight against these two zombies. And one of the most important person in this team is André Gilibert, who identified a lot of problems in these trials, and I will tell you the story. But this is a group of scientists who found problems in the trial that I will describe, and in fact, they all worked a lot on these trials. So I will start from here. I will start from the French Parliament, in which the Parliament organized a meeting like today, just to present some things, some data, and indeed a movie, a French movie that was called Malaria Business. And this was invited by Cédric Villani. Cédric Villani is a great mathematician here in France. He won the Fields medal, and he was also a deputy at this French Parliament, and invited a group to discuss the movie Malaria Business. So I will pitch you the movie. So if you are interested later, you can find the movie very easily with the QR code, and you can also find the meeting at the French Parliament. And in this movie, the pitch was very simple. Malaria is a big deal, a big problem. Malaria is usually treated with drugs. Some of those drugs contain artemisinin, which is a molecule, and this molecule can also be found in plants, in Artemisia. And this plant, if you can make some tea with those plants, in fact, artemisinin should be in the tea, and then should cure malaria. So there is a cheap, inexpensive treatment for malaria, which is a big public health problem that is underused, and the movie said that it's underused because the pharmaceutical industry don't want this remedy to be used, because they prefer to use drugs that have, of course, we know this, known side effects. So this was the pitch of the movie, and the movie presented some data, and the data that were going to be published, or a few that were published. So the group that was presenting the movie was also conducting trials, and here is the first trial. This trial is not directly in malaria, it's on schistosomiasis, because folks involved in this research are believing that, in fact, Artemisia tea infusion could cure both malaria and schistosomiasis, and indeed many other diseases, as you will see in the presentation. So this is a randomized controlled trial that involves, you can see here, 400 patients for praziquantel, and 200 patients for Artemisia annua, and 200 patients for Artemisia alpha. So 800 patients for this big randomized controlled trial in bilharzia. And here, I will present you the table about side effects. This table can be found in the web appendix of the paper. And if you have a close look at this table, you will see that there is something very strange in the data. And this pattern that is very strange is that many of those numbers are a multiple of 5. So you have 10, 5, 25, 0, 0, 0, 5, 0, 0, 0. This is an Artemisia arm, so almost no side effect, and almost all multiple of 5. And in the praziquantel arm, you have a large number of effects, of side effects, so events, and all are multiple of 5 too, which is very unlikely to see this kind of pattern. So the trial was bad beyond any repair. Here you can see survival curves, so Kaplan-Meier curves, and you can see that any events are cured at exactly the same time in the group Artemisia, and all events are cured also, but later in the group praziquantel. This neglect very basic things that you can see in biology, which is variability. So we are all different, and such kind of homogeneity is not expected in a clinical trial. So this was the trial about schistosomiasis. And they performed then a second trial, this time in malaria, so in treating Plasmodium falciparum malaria. Again, a very large trial with 957 patients who were infected that were in this trial. This was published in the same journal. This journal is called Phytomedicine. It's a journal that is well known for folks involved in phytotherapy. It has an impact factor of 5, between 4 and 5. So it's not new. Here is a table that is present in the paper, the table about adverse events. And you can see exactly the same patterns, multiple of 5 events, which is very, very unlikely. So my colleagues, the one that I told you just before, wrote a letter about all the problems with those trials. Here it's a short verbatim from the letter on schistosomiasis. They computed a p-value for observing so much multiple of 5. You can see that this is very, very unlikely. In response to this letter, the the group in charge of the trial answered that first they thanked the author, so this was a very kind answer. And then regarding abnormal multiple of 5 values, they said that those were the data received, okay, and then that those results were very similar to those of Artemisia trials against malaria. So even in their response, they say that it's exactly the same problem that in the other study. And of course, my colleague wrote also a response to the second trial. But with such concerns, with such problems, in fact, the editor should try to investigate. At this point, the editor do not investigate. It just published the letters of my colleague and the answers, as it was quite a normal discussion in the scientific process. Also, they noticed that there were problems because the number of ethic committee registration were exactly the same in the 2 trials. So in the one about schistosomiasis and in the one about malaria. Then we will see also that the study was conducted before, after approval. So the trial committee numbers seem to be outdated. And then they noted also the problem with multiple of 5 in the tables with, again, p-values that are very, 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 very low. Again, the author answered to the second letter, and they said, thank you very much for your in-depth analysis of our study. And they commented about that, and they said that the data, they had a lot of problems when they collected this data. For instance, they said that the principal investigator, had great difficulties to implement this Artemisia T trial against malaria. So despite having received all appropriate approval, okay, they do not comment really on the timing. Several academics and ministries subsequently attempted to obstruct the trial. There was also attempt to sabotage his work by stealing his laptop. Okay, this can explain some problems. There were even efforts to poison him. He almost died. So this is kind of a thing that is not easy, it's not very easy to prove, and this is what is written in the response, and it appeared in the peer review literature, but no more comment about the validity of the data. Meanwhile, I discussed with Andre, and I said, you should ask for the database. You should ask for the data, because this is especially in this kind of situation where data sharing may help to have a look at the database and to have a look at a problem in the data. So he received, my colleague Andre received the database, and when he opened the database, what he saw was a very problematic pattern in the data with lines that were repeated. So each line was a patient, and you had block of 10 patients who had exactly the same values. So for instance, you had patients who had the same temperature during 5 days, and each day the temperature was the same for all patients by a block of 10 or 20, it depended. So there was clearly a major problem in the database. So at this point, because the 2 letters seems not sufficient for the editor to and, as I said, beyond any repair. So we asked for retraction at this point. But and the database was joined to the request for retraction. So he could, the editor, open the database to just have a look at it. But he asked even more detailed information. This was on September 2019, and we had a deadline in October 20th, in 2019 to give even more detailed information that the database that you already have. And meanwhile, my colleague André Gilibert received legal threats from the sponsor's lawyers about copyright about the database that was attached for the editor. And he had to delete his submission because he was requested by the lawyer to do this. And I cannot show you the database. So this is not possible for me to show the database because I don't have the database. And also because I don't want to have a problem with the lawyers. But wait for it. In fact, they showed the database in their own movie. So you can look at this QR code with your cell phone. You can go at approximately 25 minutes and 40 seconds on the YouTube video. And then you can look a little bit and you will see the author showing his database to the journalist making this movie. So in fact, you can have a look at the database quite easily. It's not exactly the same database. We observed exactly the same pattern, so the same kind of pattern, but the numbers, we were not able to find exactly the same number in the database received by the author. So as you will see that the lines, the numbers are exactly the same for various lines when you read this. So I don't know if you did it now, but hopefully you had the time to do it and you had the time to see the database. Else you can do it at home just after this talk. Okay. So for the lawyers, I don't claim that these studies are fraudulent. I cannot say that because I don't know exactly the intent of the authors. I don't know exactly the problems that were in this trial, but there is scientific now evidence supporting the fact that the studies are true zombies, meaning that those data are totally wrong and that those studies are dead beyond any repair. So we wrote for the editor a detailed thing on how to find the problems. Of course, we could not now get the database, so we even explained to the editor how to open a PDF file, how to open a doc file. So we were a little bit funny because he asked us too much and we wanted to be sure that he would understand everything. So we submitted this and we received no feedback. Then during, let's say, 1 week, and then on the 29th of October, the same year, we saw this without any information from the editor. We saw it on the internet that the letters by my colleagues, in fact, were removed temporarily. And this is quite different from a retraction. When something is retracted, the mentioned retraction appear in red on the paper. And this is quite easy to see what was written in this paper and to see the fact that it was retracting. But with the temporary removal, everything disappeared except the title. So all our concern disappeared from the medical literature. All the concern of my colleagues disappeared. That was starting to be problematic. So we had this problem. We had the problem with lawyer. So my colleague André started to ask his university for some legal help in order to make sure that everything will be correct for him. When he asked his university, the university said, "Oh, since there is a lawyer, it's better for you to, so we won't help you a lot. It's better for you to go to the agency, the regional agency of health, which is like a regional entity that represents the Ministry of Health, and then there they have lawyers and they can help people who might have problems." But at this time, in Rouen, in Normandy, there was this big problem. That's why I use this photo for my slides. This was a big chemical fire in Rouen, in Normandy, a big chemical fire with a lot of problems in terms of public health. So you can imagine that the agency, the regional agency of health in Normandy had many other problems to deal with than our little problem with these trials about malaria. So no news from them, no much help. So we also contacted the Agency of Medicines in France. There is a specific address for whistleblowers, so we contact them. And at least it was important because it authentified that we are quite in the position of a whistleblower in this case. They said, thank you for your message, no much help from them. And there is also this big entity in France to oversee integrity of research in university. So we contacted them and they tried to have a look and said that they can also only investigate for people who are working in French university. Most of those guys are not working in a French university, except Professor Perron, who was working in Université Versailles Saint-Quentin-en-Yvelines, which is UVSQ. And so we contacted the people in charge of scientific integrity in UVSQ. When we contacted him, he said, okay, but in fact, there is nobody for scientific integrity in UVSQ because UVSQ is going to be merged with another university, which was University Paris-Saclay, in order to have this big entity. So they tried to merge together. So he said the referent for integrity should be contacted at Paris-Saclay. So we contacted Paris-Saclay, and of course they said that they are not working for UVSQ yet. So they asked us to contact UVSQ. So no referent for scientific integrity either in both universities could help us about this case. So we started to believe that nothing should be done, could be done for those trials because we tried a lot and we had many problems. So it was very difficult at this point. So I was in this conference, Reward Equator. Perhaps some of you also were in that conference. And there was Ivan Oransky who was speaking. So here is Ivan Oransky from Retraction Watch. And he had this slide in his talk where the buck stops. With journal, publisher, with copy, with university, where is the problem? With lawyers. And to be honest, the problem was with lawyers for us. So it made a lot of sense for us, a lot of sense. And I tried to discuss with Ivan about the problem because he has a good knowledge of retractions and so on. And he said that he could not really give me advice on this case, but that as a journalist, they often cover this kind of problems. But this was in February 2020, and this was perhaps the last days that we lived in a pre-COVID world. Then came the COVID, so you remember all the streets totally void, everything. And then comes the COVID and come the Surgisphere trials, the 2 trials in New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet that were retracted because of possibly faked data. Then you had also the problems of ivermectin with a lot of trials about ivermectin that were totally zombies. So things were changing, but also the activity for the journalist was focused on COVID. So nobody was really interested no longer in these 2 studies, one about malaria and the second one about schistosomiasis. So it took time, we had no news until I saw this was in June 2020 that the PI of those studies was trying to find now money to explore Artemisia effect in COVID-19. So I thought it could be a timely moment to make again to shed some light on our study. And in fact, I wrote this kind of thread on Twitter. So Twitter is super efficacious when it came to zombie trials. So I wrote this thread and then the journalist from Retraction Watch, it was Leto Sapuna, a colleague of Ivan Oransky, contacted us and asked us to discuss the story. So we discussed the story, and everything now is written in this article by Retraction Watch. And you can have a look at this. It details the story. It's very interesting because they contacted also the initial author of the story to ask them what do they believe about our claim, about the trial, and so on. And they also contacted the editor, who did not agree to answer to Retraction Watch, but the editor asked to discuss directly with the publisher. That's what Retraction Watch did. They contacted the publisher, and the publisher, knowing that everything would be public, said that they will retract the studies. And in fact, we got retraction of those 2 studies in September 2020. Though it was quite long from the beginning, the doubts that were very easy to have at the beginning and this time. So those are the zombie trials. So that's 2 examples of zombie trials. Now, how to spot those in the literature? It's not so easy. I discussed the ivermectin. So ivermectin trials, some of those appeared in systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So our skills not our skills, but our tools in evidence medicine are not always fit for purpose to identify this kind of fake data. It's not so easy. So we have now few items in the checklist that may help. This checklist is called the reappraise checklist, and I can give you here some examples of things that you would like to look at in studies to see if those studies could be zombie or not. So you can look at research governance. You could look at ethics. Is there evidence that the work was approved by a specific ethics committee? This is quite important to have a look at this. You can also contact the ethics committee. You can look at things related to authorship, to productivity, quite important. Is the volume of work reported by research group plausible, including that indicated by concurrent study for the same group? Is the staffing adequate for the study conduct? Is there something about plagiarism? Is there something about research conduct? So is the recruitment of participants plausible within the state time frame from the research? You have a few things that could be interesting to look at. You have also things about analysis and methods. Is things correct, correctly described? You have things about statistics and data. Is there some excess of homogeneity that you can find in the data? Are the data totally implausible? So you can see this in the Artemisia trials. Are there problems of errors in the data reported? And are there problems of data duplication? This kind of thing you can have a look. Now, I think we have the 2 first examples. We have this kind of semiology. We have also a group. So Jack Wilkinson, that might be here tonight, is developing and evaluating a tool for detecting those problematic trials. I mean that our tools in systematic review are not totally fit for purpose to identify this. We judge about quality and things like that, but we don't have a tool for detecting those problematic trials. So this work will be very important, and hopefully I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this. So now we have the tools. So now okay, this is a zombie movie, and as any zombie movie, you have a sequel. So this is a zombie movie 2, zombie or not zombie. I will discuss just one trial and try to use this kind of semiology in a trial. So this new trial is not about Artemisia, this one. It's about transdiagnostic treatment of emotional disorder for women with multiple sclerosis. It's a randomized controlled trial. So I start to have an interest in this study because of Dorothy Bishop. Dorothy Bishop is a colleague from UK that maybe a lot of you know, and she found on these studies some problems. So I will try to summarize all those problems. So first, the trial was retrospectively registered. So okay, it can happen that trials are retrospectively registered, but it's not, of course, something that is desirable. It's a problem. But overall, this trial was a complex trial, exploring a very complex intervention. It could be expensive and could be time-consuming to conduct. So, for instance, you had 64 women with multiple sclerosis randomized to receive treatment as usual or a unified protocol, which was the intervention of the study. It was 14 weekly 2-hour group sessions. So it lots of work, a lot of logistics to put this in place. But in fact, the recruitment of those 64 patients was completed in 1 month. For one working in clinical trial, this is very surprising, super fast, between May and June 2019. And the trial ended on 21st October 2019. That was very good timing for a trial. It was very short, and she said it's frankly hard to believe, and I agree, it's very hard to believe. Then there was also problems that she noted from the ethic approval. So always you have to look at this kind of similarity is super important. There were also problems for fundings, because she said that's a red flag, because it seemed that the funding is very low, if not zero, for a trial. Such a trial, it's not possible to do this without any funding. And she found also some kinds of question regarding the data. So I also had a look at the data, and first what I saw, it was a very huge effect size. So you have an intervention that have an effect size of minus 2.1 point for this kind of psychological intervention compared with treatment as usual. Such kind of big effect size is very unexpected. But of course, it could happen in likely small trial. We know all the problem of the small trials and this kind of effects. But this another problem, if you look at the trial and the report, you can see that you have things that are not really reproducible. For instance, in the eligibility criteria, they say high score in difficulties emotion regulation scale. But what is a high score? Usually you say it's a score superior to 5, to 10, to 8. So this is very difficult to reproduce. Of course, this can be due to sloppy reporting. But let's keep this in mind, because it will be interesting in a few next slides. Then you can look at the table of this paper, and you can see that it was just one value, but the p-value for the t-test was not in accordance with the t-statistic. So here again, something that could be quite problematic. Then you can also look, so these are the data presented in the paper, but on the ESRCTN registry, you can accede to a list, a group of documents that reports either the data of the study, either the patient consent form, and also the study protocol. So if you use the QR code, you can screen the registry, and then at the end of the page, you will see all those documents that you can download and compare. So for instance, here there is a problem. The problem is also here. So the problems appear to be in the results published on the registry. But on the registry, you can also see this. So for age, the p-value for age, when you compare groups about age, was 0.293, and here the p-value was 0.61. So we had a difference in p-value and t-statistic for especially age. So the discrepancy between the results of the registry, the results of the publication, of course, it could be a typo, but it starts to be a lot of course, it could be something, because we have a lot of problems now with the student. Now, if you look at the distribution of p-value here, you can see that there is an excess of small p-values where one would expect to have a uniform distribution of p-values. In general, with zombie trials, it's an excess of p-values showing no differences, so not pointing toward a difference. Here, it's a lot of p-values that are quite small, which is not very usual, but at least this is quite strange. And then if you look at the manuscript, if you look at the paper, you can see that there are missing data in the paper. So for instance, we have the t statistic here, equal, but no value for the t statistic. Or here you have the co-ND equal, and no value for the co-ND. Confidence interval, no value for the values, the boundary of the confidence interval. So you have missing pieces, even if the paper that was read by the editor, the reviewers, so it was peer reviewed, but they missed that here too, so in various places, they missed that there was missing values in the text, which is not quite serious for the journal. But at least it can, of course, it always can happen. This is, so you can go in the registry and find the protocol. This are part of the protocol. So part of the protocol are written in English. So this is a study from Iran, and perhaps things were traduced in English very badly, but you have things very curious in the English version of the protocol. Finally, patients met all inclusion criteria and were randomly assigned to treatment and control groups. This is not the kind of thing that you use to see in a protocol. And even if you have a bad traduction, this should not appear in the protocol. Randomization was carried out in constant, so this uses the past tense, which is not totally good for a protocol. Also, they talk about the mean age of the participants that are demonstrated. So beyond the fact that it has no sense, it's again a past tense, it refers to the data. And there was also sentence that were started without any end, given that the analysis was based on entity principle, so nothing more. So the protocol is also curious, with also differences between the protocol regarding calculation of the number of subjects on the protocol and the paper that was published. Again, we found, so here is the mention of the committee, and this is a Gmail address, which is quite unusual for ethical committee, but let's. What is very interesting with this paper, and that will be one of my last points, I have still 2 minutes before my end, is that BMC Women's Health use, in fact, an open peer review process. And we can have a look at the reviewer reports and the comment by the authors. So you can have a look too. So let's have a look at the first reviewer. For the first reviewer, is here his report on this paper. It's essentially a well-written paper. I would recommend all the short forms have their expanded version when you introduce them in the paper. Please make this necessary correction. So I never received a peer review like that, especially in case my paper has missing pieces in it. So this is a very good peer review. We don't know the name of the reviewer because it's not openly available. Some journals make it available, but not in that case. So of course the author answered and they say thank you, of course. And also they said that they put all the abbreviations, it's correct. So you can see that even their answer is longer than the problems spotted by the reviewer. So it's very interesting. And then you have a second reviewer. So the second reviewer appeared to have read carefully the paper, or at least better than the first reviewer. And he said that he found some problem. And for instance, in the inclusion criteria, as I told you, those inclusion criteria were ill-defined. And he said, there is one criteria that's called moderate to high cognitive impairment or physical disabilities. Which screening tool was used for cognitive impairment, and how moderate to high cognitive was defined? What was the score? So I told you this for another inclusion criteria. He saw this for this criteria, high cognitive impairment. And the author answer is very interesting because they don't explain why. They don't explain what was the threshold. They just say that they have deleted this item from the selection criteria. So when can you delete an item from the selection criteria during the peer review process without answering any question? This is not very serious, but it was what they wrote, their answer. And in fact, it was accepted by the editor. So I should say that also this reviewer pointed that there was, in the first version of the manuscript, a version that is not available on internet, that he found some description of the result that did not coincide with the data presented in the table 1. So there were differences between the paper and the table. So perhaps it might explain the inaccuracy that I show in the table. Perhaps things were corrected during the peer review process. I cannot tell you much more because this is not available. So, okay, so they said that they revised the descriptive. So both, at the end of the day, both reviewers were very happy. Okay, this is a new disclosure for the lawyer. I don't claim that this study is fraudulent, but it seems that at least some part of the paper are wrong, and it needs investigation for the editor. Is it a zombie? Is it not a zombie? Let's see. This is ongoing, so I was contacted by the editor, and let's keep in touch. You can follow me on Twitter, and you will have some news soon about these trials. My last point, perhaps the one I want to say, that open science practices surely helps. So for instance, open peer review help. Here we can see that there is one reviewer that was very, very positive. Who was this reviewer? And you know that peer review can be sometimes hijacked, so perhaps it was the case in this case. And also open material, data sharing may help. I would say that in the two Artemisia trials, some of the authors shared the data with us, and it helped to find that those trials were fake beyond repair. Okay, so thank you very much. I would like to thank a lot my colleagues, that all those that I mentioned at the beginning, and especially André Gilibert, and also Dorothy Bishop for this last case. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Florian. This is an amazing presentation on a fascinating subject, which is honestly, from my personal perspective, hardly believable. If you can switch on your cameras, I would like to open the floor for questions to Florian. Does anyone have any question to Florian? I will kick off with the questions, Florian, if you don't mind. Florian, do you have, so these are fairly recent studies, Florian, and do you have any idea to which extent these zombie studies are prevalent? Is it a new phenomenon which happens in research, and do you know what are the mechanisms behind the conduct of these this kind of studies? What is the motivation of the investigators to conduct some? I would be very careful with my wording. Some strange research. Do you have any ideas on that?
So it's difficult to know. I think this is something that is not so new. So what happened is that during the COVID pandemic, we had a lot of light on this. I think Jack he might be here too, and he said to me that, for instance, he wanted to have funding before the COVID pandemic about this topic, and it was very hard. And with the COVID pandemic, it helped because you had a lot of light about these issues. So you had the Lancet Gate, you had the ivermectin trial. So people get aware of this. But to be honest, everything that happened during the COVID pandemic was here, well, a long time before the COVID pandemic. So it's about this, it's about questionable research practices. Everything was present before. So this is not something that is new. Of course, during the pandemic, it became very, very visible. And what are the motivation? To be honest, regarding the malaria trial, I would be very interesting to know this. But I would say that it was not directly our job as scientists. So our job was to identify the problems in the trial, to discuss those problems, but not to investigate what led the author to do this. Now to know who was responsible for that. So these are open questions, and it's very interesting. But it's rather the job for journalists. So in case you have some journalists here happy to investigate on this, I would be happy to discuss.
David.
Hello. That's pretty riveting. Two things occur to me. One is the number of authors. Are they all complicit, or do some of them simply not have? Some of them never read it. I mean, it is quite a long-standing problem of guest authors whose name appears but have made no contribution. I myself have published a paper in a case in which a rather senior person attached his name to the paper, but clearly never read it. It was pretty shocking, I thought.
Yeah, I cannot tell you again because I don't know the authors and their motivation. But my impression is that at least some authors share the database with us. So I think those who shared the database were not totally aware of that. I think that in this group, there are some professional researchers, including one from a French university that had also a few problems with a certain hydroxychloroquine trial. So it was Professor Perron. So he has some knowledge about clinical research. In the group, there are some people from associations that are not directly very well aware of clinical research, of data quality control, and they don't have a lot of skills in statistics. So perhaps they were of good faith, but just without any understanding of what they were signing, in fact. And I think there is a mix of everything, of all of this. But I cannot tell you exactly the exact motivation of everybody, of course, because this is beyond my expertise.
Yes, it seems to me that this is an argument for abolishing journals altogether. Because the argument against that has always been that any old rubbish can get published. The trouble is, any old rubbish can get published in a peer-reviewed journal, which gives it a false appearance of respectability. And it would save a great amount of money if we did that.
Of course. Yeah.
So, great talk, thank you. Reminds me a little bit first of Gregor Mendel, who of course fiddled his results with the P's because they didn't fit his idea of exact statistics. But I do want to just report a much larger zombie or series of zombie papers and perhaps an insight into why people do it. And this was about 20 years ago, where I'm an oncologist. So about 20 years ago, bone marrow, high-dose chemotherapy for bone marrow transplantation became widely used, particularly in the United States. The idea was you gave sufficient dose and then you transplanted bone marrow to protect the women. And it was so used that people were actually sued for not offering it to patients. And around that time, there were several trials done. There was a couple in the States, there was one in Canada, there was one in Europe, or two in Europe actually, and they were all negative. But at the same time, there were two trials done by a guy his name was Bezwoda from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. So a sort of totally unknown man leading these trials from a university that most of us had never heard of. And they were published in high impact journals. The author, Bezwoda, was invited to the large ASCO meeting, which is a meeting of now about 40,000 people, and presented at the plenary session. And then the ASCO organization decided to send a team of 2 or 3 people to South Africa, and it took them about half an hour to find out that the results were totally fabricated. And there was some discussion about motivation. And I think here, probably what you had was a guy unknown, but had this sort of, 3 or 4 years in the sun of fame. And then, of course, has disappeared from the picture. And that may have been the balance. That's pure conjecture, of course. But as you know, this isn't just sort of papers that appear in relatively minor journals, but as you talked about the New England and Lancet retractions, but can occur and have an incredibly large influence on a field, and a lot of women were harmed by that treatment. But again, thank you. It's a great talk.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, I agree. And we proposed it. So with my colleague André Gilibert, we wrote a small letter to the Lancet after the Lancet Gate, just to suggest that they should have a reproducible research editor, because it means that it's not always so. What I showed was quite easy to spot and to find, and you had to have a look at the study, but it's not the usual thing that one looks when he performs peer review. So peer review relies on trust first. So science relies, of course, it's a good thing that science relies on trust, of course, but the usual peer review relies on trust, methodological criticism, and criticism sometimes of the biological question and things like that, but not so much on detections of this kind of fraud or fake or bad data. And we suggested that an editor with specific skills could have a look at each paper, and it could be useful, but they didn't publish our letter.
Oh, no. David.
Yes. Did you say that this guy on the first trial you talked about had been given a grant of 2 million?
No, he was looking for the grant of 2 million. He was looking for the grant for.
Did he get it?
I don't know, but he get appointed to a research institute during the COVID research. Yeah.
Oh dear.
He get appointment, yes. And now he is very closely related with political power. So I don't know more about his trajectory, but perhaps those studies and all his work regarding Artemisia helped him.
Wow, amazing. Lydie, that's your question. Sorry. Good evening.
Yeah. I have a question. Maybe I missed it, because we also have been trying to get papers retracted from a fully false trial setup regarding GC-MAF. You might remember that, the macrophage activating factor in oncology story. And then, we could get a retraction from some of the journals that published on that topic, but one journal said it's not them to blame, it's the institutions, and we should reach out to the institutions where the authors are affiliated. Is that a pathway you tried? Did you? I can't. Sorry, maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen the institutions to where the affiliations were. Did you reach out to those institutions or?
Yeah. So as I told you, so in France we have this organism for scientific integrity, and they are representative of scientific integrity in each university. So I tried to reach the one in the Université Versailles Saint-Quentin-en-Yvelines, where Professor Perron works. And then they said that there was nobody. They asked me to contact another university because the two universities were merging. And the one from the other university said, no, I'm not looking at the studies from the Université Versailles Saint-Quentin-en-Yvelines. So he asked me to contact the president of the university. I contacted him. It was during the COVID pandemic. And he said, okay, so we have a lot more to do in our university. We have to make sure that our students don't catch the COVID. So, so they were not so much interested in this. And that's what occurred with university. So we didn't have a lot of help from this.
Yeah, because the only thing, we also had a case with Stanford University. And there it became really tricky. It was a different story about falsification. But there, it really became with lawyers, and then they kind of settled and agreed for the withdrawal. But then we should not make too much noise of it. You know how it goes. But I think really, I don't know how helpful it is to go that pathway. But I think the bigger the universities or the centers, maybe you can threaten them in one way or the other. I don't know what your ideas are about that.
Yeah, so I would say that you can contact directly the president of Stanford, because as you know, actually there are investigations on some of his work.
Oh, no.
But it's quite difficult. Hopefully things will change also because of the COVID pandemic, because people are getting more and more aware of those problems. So you know that in France we have a total institute of research that had very problematic behaviors regarding publication, and even in a recent journal investigation on the TV show, the new so a board member of the center said that recognized that one of those studies was fraudulent. He said the word fraudulent. So hopefully things will change. No.
No, I doubt it. Mr. Maisonneuve, sorry.
Yes, bonjour, Hervé, my first name.
Désolé, je ne savais pas si c'était Henri ou Hervé, désolé.
That's fine.
Allez-y, Hervé.
Thank you, Florian, for this presentation. I just want to add two comments. You have to consider that for Artemisia, it's not considered as a drug, it's a tea, and the authors were trying to sell the tea over the net. So they have also a website, and they were selling their tea, which is not a drug. So they didn't have to go through drug agencies. It was a very important for the author, because they wanted to make money. I assume that probably they didn't do a lot of money, but they sold quite a lot. Anyway.
This and also the fact that we saw something regarding their communication on the internet. So at the beginning, they were stating to French people who are traveling abroad to use the tea for prevention of malaria. And now they don't recommend this because they don't want to have problems with the French authorities. And now they put the problem on the countries, but not on France. So from the French perspective, they are not very interesting to investigate, I would say.
Yes, exactly. Second comment, just maybe out of the scope. I was a research integrity officer in France for 3 years. No more. And I confirm that, Florian, the system doesn't really work in France. We have a lot of talks, we have a lot of presentation, but we'd never had a guy that was really condemned, for example, to reimburse money, a grant. We have no sanction at all. We have a full system, but nobody has been accused and condemned. So I am very nasty about this French system, which is officially fine, but our IO are probably protecting the institution more than the guy.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
David.
Yes, it occurs to me, did they say anywhere how much artemisinin was in their tea? Because if it's a suboptimal dose, it spreads resistance. It's ghastly, and it probably was.
This is a problem. And actually, Artemisia is not very soluble in water. So if you put the leaf in the water, there is not much artemisinin in the water. So this is a big problem. And that's why the WHO does not recommend the use of this kind of tea infusion.
Yes.
But in their narrative, in the documentary, in the movie that they saw, they said that WHO was against because WHO was protecting Big Pharma. And this is the kind of narrative they had.
Well, phytochemistry is a quack journal anyway, isn't it? But
right.
Largely.
Florian, I wanted to just to because you mentioned some possible solutions, and you touched on the weaknesses of peer review, which is and in fact the fact that you can basically publish any paper anywhere in predator journals or in bad journals with very poor peer review. But also wanted the point of to highlight the issue of authorities, health authorities. You know that health authorities, one important weapon to try to prevent or detect fraud are inspections. And I also wanted to elaborate on for me, the critical point made by Hervé, which are sanctions. In the case of MMR and Wakefield, when Wakefield published his fraudulent paper in I think it was in the Lancet, and when the fraud was discovered, Wakefield Andrew Wakefield, sorry, was struck from the GNC, and he cannot work in England anymore. So what you believe that what are the solutions to try to minimize or prevent the occurrence of these zombie trials? And do you think that health authorities, in a sense, are weak, even guilty of not doing enough to try to prevent this misconduct?
So I think it's difficult to answer on what could help to prevent the problem. Regarding health authorities, I think there is something very interesting that health authorities are responsible for looking at the evidence, judging if this evidence is sufficient to provide market approval. But they are not, this process is disconnected from the process of publication. So first, it could be very interesting to reconnect both. So we proposed last year a model, what we call the registered drug approval, based on the model of registered report. It may help, not especially regarding this kind of fraud, although it could be interesting, but it may help also to reduce some questionable research practices like outcome switching, like selective outcome reporting and publication bias. So this could be very interesting to address. But in order to prevent the phenomena, I don't know if it's very preventable. So first, at least we can have more appropriate way to handling the problems. So usually, as I told you, it's very long to have a reaction for correction. So with the things that we saw in the case of Artemisia, it should have been an expression of concern in 2 days, and then a deep investigation of the editor. So this could be something. Then also we had a lot of problems with these editors in phytomedicine, but the editor is still in place, is still working, even if the publisher disagreed with him and asked him to retract the papers. So why is this editor still working in this journal? This is also a responsibility of the publisher. So I think there is a lot of things to do to correct the problem. To prevent it, I think it's more tricky.
Florian, thank you very much for this. It's a fascinating subject. It was very interesting talk. I hope that you will detect even more zombie studies in the future. So on behalf of Lisa and Concilium, I really want to thank you for your presentation on your this very interesting subject on discussion. And I will close the presentation on the meeting. We see each other. I think it's the beginning of next year now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all.
Thank you. Bye.